What's up guys, and welcome back to All Things Korean. So let's just cut straight to the chase. As your Korean vocabulary expands and grows, you will come across many times a situation in which you notice that a Sino-Korean character is spelled this way in one word and another way in another word. And this video is going to address that specifically. Long story short, it's because of a specific rule in Korean called the 투음 법칙. Now, if you translate it literally, 투 means head, means sound, and 법칙 means rule. So in other words, it's a set of rules concerning the sounds that can come at the head or the initial of a word. Now, I looked through all of the rules on the website of the National Institute of Korean Language, and that's a lot of info to process. So I'm not going to go over all the rules, all the different contexts, and all the exceptions. I'm just going to give you a general overview of what the rule is about, so that when you do come across a word and you notice that the word is spelled a little differently depending on where it's placed within the word, then you can be like, oh, this must be why. So the purpose of this video is to help you understand why certain words might be spelled differently, not to educate you on every single rule there is that has to do with this 투음 법칙. So with that being said, let's talk about what the rule says. So I'm going to divide this 투음 법칙 into two categories. One is the 니은 투음 법칙, and the second is the 리을 투음 법칙. Start with the first one, 니은. This rule says that in some cases, a word cannot start with the nian sound. Which cases are we talking about? That all depends on the vowel. So if the vowel starts in an E, or a diphthong that starts with an E, so in other words, ya, yo, you. If a word starts with nian plus any of these vowels, it's not acceptable. It just can't come at the front of a word. Therefore, it gets converted into an iung, or an empty consonant. So ni, nya, nyo, nyo, nyu would be pronounced instead as I, ya, yo, yo, yu. Why? Supposedly, it's easier to pronounce for the native Korean speaker. So, for example, you have a word like 소녀, which means like a young girl. And the 녀 in 소녀 is a Sino-Korean character that means girl. But when this character comes at the front of a word, it becomes 여, like in the word 여자. There are a couple of exceptions, of course. I'm not going to go through all of them, but one such exception is when the word is a dependent noun, like the word 년, which means year. And this particular 년 cannot stand on its own as a noun. It needs some sort of modifier before it, like how many years. So like 몇 년. And in such cases, the 년 is not changed to 연. It's just pronounced as it is. There are other exceptions, but I thought this was the most important one to know, so I'm only including that one exception in this video. So that was the 니은 투음 법칙. Let's move on to the 리을 투음 법칙. This one, simply put, says that words cannot start with a 리을 sound. And you might be like, but I know some words that start with 리을. What about 라면? What about 라디오, 리본? If you've noticed something similar between all these words that start with 리을, that's because they're loan words. So when it comes to loan words that start with a 리을 sound, that sound is retained. But for Korean or Sino-Korean words, that 리을 sound cannot come at the head of a word. So what happens? It turns into a 니은, or it's changed and pronounced as a 니은 sound. So the example we're going to look at today is the word 쾌락. Now, 락 is the Sino-Korean character that means enjoyment. But when this 락 comes at the front of a word, it gets converted into a 낙, like in words like 낙원, which means paradise. So it's not 낙원, but 낙원. Here's another example in which both the 니은 투음 법칙 and the 리을 투음 법칙 are applied in the same character. Let's look at this word, 설량. This word means goodness. The 량 in this word is a Sino-Korean character that means goodness. And so does 선, so it's just like real goodness, goodness. But when this 량 comes at the front of a word, does it become 냥? It can't because the vowel is a ya, and the combination of ni은 and ya, as we learned in the first 니은 두음 법칙, that's not an acceptable sound. So according to the 리을 두음 법칙, 량 would be converted into 냥. But according to the 니은 두음 법칙, 냥 would again be converted into yang. So the Sino-Korean character 량 is kept as is when it's in the middle of a word, but at the word initial it would be pronounced as yang. You get that in words like 양심, which means conscience. Another interesting example is the surname Lee. I made a video about this a long time ago about, why the surname is Lee in Korean but Lee in English. So if you look at the Sino-Korean character, the original pronunciation of it is Lee. But because of 두음 법칙, Lee is not an acceptable sound. So it gets converted into ni, which according to the 니은 두음 법칙, it gets converted again into e. An interesting thing to note though is that this rule does not apply in North Korea. So the Korean spoken in North Korea does not acknowledge this 두음 법칙. So if you look at the surnames written in Korean, in North Korea, it's written as Lee instead of e. I think it's pretty interesting to see how the Korean in North and South Korea have kind of gone their separate ways over the decades. But yeah, that's the 두음 법칙 in a nutshell. I hope you found this video helpful. I hope it answered some of the questions you might have had while you were studying Korean vocabulary. If you found this video helpful, please hit that like button and subscribe to All Things Korean for more information and videos on Korean language and culture, I guess, and all that stuff. Then I will see you in the next one. 다음 영상에서 만나요.